Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western Literary Canon out loud. Today we continue journal collection number 55, and we are, I think, a little under halfway through the year at this point. I'm not exactly sure because he so seldom writes dates anymore. I'm actually, as we talk, no, actually, we are um, before the halfway point. So the next uh, date he puts is May 24th, and that's a few pages later. So we're still relatively early in this year, and like I said in the other video, this is the last large compilation of journal entries that Emerson will have in a particular collection. The others get exceedingly small, as you'll find out as the video times get smaller and smaller. Each collection will probably just be one video after a couple videos from now. Anyway, with that said, I'll go ahead and start the next entry. It is hard to remember in glancing over our sumptuous library edition and excellent pocket editions of Chaucer that for 100 years these works existed only in manuscripts, accumulating errors and false readings in every individual copy of every new transcriber. 'Tis alarming to reckon the risks and judge of the damage done. A journalist in London or in New York acquires a facility and elan which throws the slow elaborators for the Edinburgh and the North American into the shade. Thus, the lively article Schopenhauer in New York Commercial Advertiser of May 31st eclipses Hedges' learned paper in the Examiner. Schopenhauer said of chaste persons, "They are thorns which produce roses." He said, "An impersonal God is a word void of sense, invented by professors of philosophy to satisfy fools and hack drivers. My great discovery is to show how, at the bottom of all things, there is only one identical force, always equal and ever the same, which slumbers in plants, awakens in animals, but finds its consciousness only in man, the will." That is, continues the journalist, the world which we all believe we see is only a phenomenal world. Above it, but at a tremendous distance, we find the real world, and this real world is the will. Between these two he places a kind of plastic mediator which he calls ideas. But, it seems, Schopenhauer in his youth learned Sanskrit, and learned his secret of the Buddhists. De tribus impostoribus means Fichte, Schelling, and Hegel. It is, I own, difficult not to be intemperate in speaking of Shakespeare, and most difficult, I would say, to the best readers. Few, I think none, arrive at any intelligence of his methods. His intellect does not emit jets of light at intervals, but is incessant, always equal to the occasion, and addressing with equal readiness a comic, an ingenious, or a sublime problem. I find him an exceptional genius. If the world were on trial, it is the perfect success of this one man that might justify such expenditure of geology, chemistry, fauna, and flora as the world was. And I suppose if intellect perceives and converses, and climbs beyond the solar road, they probably call this planet not Earth, but Shakespeare. Alcott said, in speaking of children, "I think a son translates the privacy of the family to the public. Daughters cannot do it." Michelangelo's Third Sonnet. The power of a beautiful face lifts me to heaven, since else in earth is none that delights me, and I mount living among the elect souls, a grace which seldom falls to a mortal. So well with its maker the work consents, that I rise to him through divine conceptions, and here I shape all thoughts and words, burning, loving through this gentle form. Whence, if ever from two beautiful eyes I know not how to turn my look, I know in them the light which shows me the way which guides me to God. And if, kindled at their light, I burn, and my noble flame sweetly shines, the eternal joy which smiles in heaven. College Mathematics. For a fraction of each class, say 20, though I think that is too many, In a class of more than 100, the whole class is oppressed by a course of mathematics, which is a perpetual fatigue, costing frequently, I am told, 5 or 6 hours for the learning the daily lesson, and that is imperfectly, and thus bereaving the student of his necessary outdoor exercise. Add to this that at short intervals occur the mathematical examinations, which are serious, really testing the knowledge which the student has acquired in the foregoing weeks. The professor is impartial and resolved to know the proficiency of each pupil. The few good mathematicians easily do their work and leave the room, which remained occupied for 5 or 6 hours by the rest, who perform in all that time only a part of the work, and retire exhausted and unhappy. The young men are not thus worked with impunity. They lose flesh, vigor, and spirit. The college, which should be to them a place of delightful labor, where their faculties are invited out to studies useful and agreeable to them, is made odious and unhealthy, and they are tempted to frivolous amusements to rally their jaded spirits. It would be better, no doubt, if they had good teachers, but in the experience of colleges it is found that whilst good mathematicians are rare, good teachers of mathematics are much more rare. It has happened that 2 or 3 female teachers in our schools have had great success, and that in the college geometers and analysts of unquestionable ability utterly fail in the power to impart their methods to the willing student. All the aid the student gets is from some chum who has a little more knowledge than he, and knows where the difficulty he has just surmounted lay. I have just seen 4 of these skeleton sufferers, to whom all the studies in the university are sufficiently attractive, excepting the mathematics, and who find this, which they do not wish to acquire, thrust into absurd eminence, absorbing nominally 1/3 of the academic time in the 2 first years, and practically often 2/3, a dead weight on the mind and heart of the pupil, to be utterly renounced and forgotten the moment he is left to the election of his studies, and a painful memory of wasted years and injured constitution as long as he lives. Language, rhetoric, logic, ethics, intellectual philosophy, poetry, natural history, civil history, political economy, technology, chemistry, agriculture, literary history, as the genius of Homer, Dante, Shakespeare, and Goethe, music and drawing, even, all these may rightly enter into the curriculum as well as mathematics. But it were to hurt the university if any one of these should absorb a disproportionate share of time. The European universities gave a like supreme emphasis to the subtleties of logic in the days of Occam to theology, when the priesthood controlled education. Until recently, natural science was almost excluded, and it is inevitable that a man of genius with a good deal of general power will for a long period give a bias in his direction to a university. And that is a public mischief which the guardians of a college are there to watch and counterpoise. In the election of a president, it is not only the students who are to be controlled, but the professors, each of which is, in proportion to his talents, a usurper who needs to be resisted. May 24th. Yesterday, May 23rd, we buried Hawthorne in Sleepy Hollow, in a pomp of sunshine and verdure and gentle winds. James Freeman Clarke read the service in the church and at the grave. Longfellow, Lowell, Holmes, Agassiz, Hoar, Dwight, Whipple, Norton, Alcott, Hillard, Fields, Judge Thomas, and I attended the hearse as pallbearers. Franklin Pierce was with the family. The church was copiously decorated with white flowers, delicately arranged. The corpse was unwillingly shown only a few moments to this company of his friends, but it was noble and serene in its aspect, nothing amiss. A calm and powerful head. A large company filled the church and the grounds of the cemetery. All was so bright and quiet that pain or mourning was hardly suggested, and Holmes said to me that it looked like a happy meeting. Clarke in the church said that Hawthorne had done more justice than any other to the shades of life, shown a sympathy with the crime in our nature, and, like Jesus, was the friend of sinners. I thought there was a tragic element in the event that might be more fully rendered, and the painful solitude of the man, which I suppose could not longer be endured, and he died of it. I have found in his death a surprise and disappointment. I thought him a greater man than any of his works betray, that there was still a great deal of work in him, and that he might one day show a purer power. Moreover, I have felt sure of him in his neighborhood and in his necessities of sympathy and intelligence, that I could well wait his time, his unwillingness and caprice, and might one day conquer a friendship. It would have been a happiness, doubtless, to both of us to have come into habits of unreserved intercourse. It was easy to talk with him, there were no barriers, only he said so little that I talked too much, and stopped only because, as he gave no indications, I feared to exceed. He showed no egotism or self-assertion, rather a humility, and at one time a fear that he had written himself out. One day, when I found him on the top of his hill in the woods, he paced back the path to his house and said, "This path is the only remembrance of me that will remain." Now it appears that I waited too long. Lately he had removed himself the more by the indignation his perverse politics and unfortunate friendship for that paltry Franklin Pierce awakened, though it rather moved pity for Hawthorne and the assured belief that he would outlive it and come right at last. I have forgotten in what year, September 27th, 1842, says the editors, but it was whilst he lived in the manse, soon after his marriage, that I said to him, "I shall never see you in this hazardous way. We must take a long walk together. Will you go to Harvard and visit the Shakers?" He agreed, and we took a June day and walked the 12 miles, got our dinner from the brethren, slept at the Harvard Inn, and returned home by another road the next day. It was a satisfactory tramp, and we had good talk on the way, of which I set down some record in my journal. Reginald Taylor, a child of 6 years, was carried to see his mother's kinsman, President Day. On his return home he said, "Mother, I think that old man loves God too much. You know I say my prayers when I go to bed. Well, he talks just so all the time." June, and there's a question mark by it. Logic the fist, rhetoric the hand. Zeno. The genius of a race or family is a stream always equal to itself, and if the present tenant finishes it too much, the next tenant, his son, will find the stream poor, and must withhold his nets and seines. Hence we say, a great man has not a great son, but this proverb has marked exceptions, and it is also observed that intellect runs in races. I, too, am fighting my campaign. So many things require the top of health, the flower of the mind. The engraver must not lay stone walls, nor the king's lapidary pave streets. 'Tis fine health that helps itself with the lucky expressions and fit images. All things offer themselves to be words and convey its meaning, but lassitude has nothing but prose. What omniscience has music, so absolutely impersonal, and yet every sufferer feels his secret sorrow soothed? Within I do not find wrinkles and used heart, but unspent youth. Value of an opposition. Only the heat of party can hatch the egg, can formulate the truth which your party overlooks, and which is, and will hereafter be admitted to be, the needed check on your statement. 'Tis bad when believers and unbelievers live in the same manner. I distrust the religion. La carrière ouverte aux talents. I'm not sure what that translates as, but it's the heading of a short paragraph here. A good stand. I notice that the spider finds it a good stand wherever he falls. He takes the first corner, and then flies make haste to come. Inspiration. I have found my advantage in going to a hotel with a task which could not prosper at home. I secured so a more absolute solitude. At home the day is cut up into short strips. In the hotel I forget rain, wind, cold, and heat. At home I remember in my library the wants of the farm, and have all too much sympathy. I envy the abstraction of some scholars I have known. All the conditions must be right for my success, slight as that is. What untunes is as bad as what cripples or stuns me. Therefore I extol the prudence of Carlyle, who for years projected a library at the top of his house, high above the orbit of all the housemaids, and out of earshot of doorbells. Could that be once secured, a whole floor, room for books, and a good bolt, he could hope for 6 years of history, and he kept it in view till it was done. And George Sand's love of heat agrees with mine. Even the steel pen is a nuisance. The capital rule must not be forgotten of, and then there is a French quotation here, or as Van Helmont says, study of eternity. And the first rule for me would be to defend the morning, keep all its dews on. Goethe thanks the flies that waked him at dawn as the musagetes. And where shall I find the record of my brag of places, favorite spots in the woods and on the river, whither I once went with security for a poetic mood? In my paper on Civilization, I omitted an important trait, namely the increased respect for human life. The difference between the Oriental nations on one side and Europe and America on the other lies mainly herein. The Japanese in France are astonished, 'tis said, at the vast apparatus and expense of a capital trial, examples of Eastern slaughter referred to. Remember General Scott's maxim, too, about the sacrifice of one's life more than necessity requires. The French say that the special characteristic of English art is the absence of genius. This is attributed to M. Chesneau. Inspiration. Aunt Mary wrote, "How sad that atmospheric influences should bring to dust the communions of soul with the infinite," meaning, how sad that the atmosphere should be an excitant. But no, she should be glad that the atmosphere and the dull rock itself should be deluged with deity, should be theists, Christian, Unitarian, poetic. Dr. S. Haltree, master of Eton, says, "I refer to another feature which an Eton education calls into existence. I mean the kind of serenity and repose of character. This will be at once recognized as a well-known characteristic of free-minded English gentlemen, and I think Eton has its full share in perpetuating this characteristic in an age in which there is much vying with, much outrunning and outwitting one another." This is not irony in Dr. Haltree, though it reads so on this side of the water. Of Paris, Renan writes, after saying that the provincial academies of France have no original studies, then there's a long French quotation here, which has no footnote in English. When Renan speaks of France, Macaulay or any Englishman of England or any American of America, I feel how babyish they are. I suppose hardly Newton or Swedenborg or Cervantes or Menu can be trusted to speak of his nationality. The grief of old age is, that now only in rare moments, and by happiest combinations or consents of the elements, can we attain those enlargements and that intellectual élan which were once a daily gift. Men are good where they have experience, but not off their beat. Hence Dr. Robert Hare and Mr. S. and many other men reckoned of excellent sense tumble helplessly into mesmeric spiritism, and prove it most credulous dupes, because here they have no guide. It is in government as it is in war. It was said many officers can maneuver a regiment or a division who could not get 100,000 men in or out of Hyde Park without confusion. So in government. There is plenty of administrative skill in trade and civil affairs, management of railroads and factories, which is at once at a loss and unequal to the disposition of the affairs of an empire. A good text was that medical observation suggested by the distemper of the cattle at Chinnery's and elsewhere, namely that men carry the seeds of diseases in their constitutions latent, and which remain latent during much, perhaps during the whole, of their life. But if it happen that the patient loses from any cause his normal strength, instantly those seeds begin to ripen, and the disease so long latent becomes acute and conquers him. June. I have more enjoyed in the last hours of finishing a chapter the insight which has come to me of how the truths really stand, than I suffered from seeing in what confusion I had left them in my statement. St. Francis rode all day along the border of the Lake of Geneva, and at night, hearing his companions speak of the lake, inquired, "What lake?" Morison's Life of St. Francis. It is a tie between men to have read the same book. Great men are the universal men, men of the common sense, not provincial. Raphael, not a mannerist. Everybody would paint like Raphael if everybody could paint at all. Reserves. We can never compete with English in manufactures because of the low price of labor in Europe, says the Merchants Day by Day. Yet this season, half or two-thirds of our laborers are gone to the war, and we have reaped all the hay by the use of the horse mower and the horse rake, the wheat by McCormick's reaper, and when the shoemakers went, then by the use of the new pegging machine and scrap machine, we make 600 pairs of shoes every day at Feltonville, and can let Weymouth send away for 100 shoemakers to the war and the regiments that has just departed. We make horseshoes by machine as well as Pittsburgh. We can spare all the whalemen to the Navy, for we draw oil out of the rocks in Pennsylvania. We can spare the Cuba sugar, for we have made 7,000,000 gallons of sour-gum molasses in 1860, though the article was not known here in 1850. In that theme of inspiration, 'tis to be noted that we use ourselves and use each other. Some perceptions, I think the best, are granted to the single soul. Kings, then there's an untranslated French quotation, said the French King John who was taken prisoner at Poitiers. Manners. Their vast convenience I must always admire. The perfect defense and isolation which they effect makes an insuperable protection. Though he wrestles with you, or swims with you, lodge in the same chamber, sleep in the same bed, he is yet 1,000 miles off, and can at any moment finish with you. Manners seem to say, "You are I, and I am I." Old age brings along with its uglinesses the comfort that you will soon be out of it, which ought to be a substantial relief to such discontented pendulums as we are. To be out of the war, out of debt, out of the drought, out of the blues, out of the dentist's hands, out of the second thoughts, mortifications, and remorses that inflict such twinges and shooting pains, out of the next winter and the high prices and company below your ambition. Surely these are soothing hints. And, harbinger of this, what an alleviator is sleep which muzzles all these dogs for me every day. Old age, 'tis proposed to call an indignation meeting. Man. The body borrows the elements of its blood from the whole world, and the mind its belief. The tradition is never left at peace, but must be winnowed again by the newcomers. Every age has another sieve, and will sift it out again. Our Democratic Party shows itself very badly in these days, simply destructive, and would tear down God from heaven if they could. Talk with Alcott last night. Men have no scale. Talents warp them. They don't see when their tendency is wrong, don't discriminate between the rank of this and that perception. A gossiping, rambling talk, and yet kept the line of American tendencies. The English and French are still 30 or 40 years back in theology. What questions do bishops and universities discuss? We have silently passed beyond all such debatable lands. Want of scale appears in this. Each of the masters has some puerility, as Carlyle his pro-slavery whim, Tennyson English class feeling, university men, churchmen, not humanity, heroism, truth. Our faculties are of different ages. The memory is mature, sometimes the imagination adult, and yet the moral sense still swaddled and sheathed. Yet on the credit of their talent, these masters are allowed to parade this baby faculty, all fits and folly in the midst of grown company. We have freedom, are ready for truth, but we have not the executive culture of Germany. They have good metaphysics, have made surveys sounding every rod of way, set their foot on every rock, and where they felt the rock they planted a buoy and recorded it. Kant, Hegel, Schelling are architects. Scope is not sufficient. We have scope, but we want the Copernicus of our inward heaven. Let us be very mum at present about American literature. One of these ages, we too will set our feet on Andes' tops. We lack repose. As soon as we stop working or active thinking, we mope. There is no self-respect, no grand senses of sharing the divine presence. We are restless, run out and back, talk fast and overdo. Nothing in the universe so solid as a thought. An Indian came to the white man's door and asked for rum. "Oh, no," said the farmer, "I don't give rum to Indians. They steal my pigs and chickens." "Oh, me no steal, me good Indian." "But good Indians don't ask for rum," replied the farmer. "Me no good Indian, me damn rascal." Use of towns I considered in an old journal in many points, but we are far from having the best aesthetics out of them. The French and Italians have made a nearer approach to it. A town in Europe is a place where you can go into a cafe at a certain hour of every day, buy eau sucrée or a cup of coffee for 6 sous, and at that price have the company of the wits, scholars, and gentlemen fond of conversation. That is a cheap and excellent club which finds and leaves all parties on a good mutual footing. That is the fame of the Café Procope, the Café Greek of Rome, and the Café de Trinita of Florence, and the principle of it exists in every town in France and Italy, but we do not manage it so well in America. Our clubbing is much more costly and cumbersome. The test of civilization is the power of drawing the most benefit out of cities. The young men in America take little thought of what men in England are thinking or doing. It may be safely affirmed that when the highest conception, the lessons of religion, are imported, the nation is not culminating, has not genius, but is servile. 'Tis a good word of Niebuhr in speaking of the respect which somehow the oracles obtained in the ancient world. Did man in those early periods stand nearer to nature? See Lieber's Reminiscences. In Italy, a nobleman said to Niebuhr, "I understand the present pope is not even a man of family." "Oh," replied Niebuhr, "I have been told that Christ himself was not a man of family, and St. Peter, if I recollect well, was but of a vulgar origin. Here in Rome we don't mind these things." Editor's note. Certain family or events occurring in this year may be mentioned. Mr. Emerson's elder brother, William, on whom his early responsibilities and long years of assiduous professional work had worn heavily, came to Concord with his wife for the summer. The year had for them been one of grief and anxiety. William, the eldest son, a young man of charming personality, scholarly habit, and a promising student of law, had died of consumption a few months after his marriage. John Haven, the second son, gave his services, medical and surgical, to help care for the wounded during Grant's Wilderness Campaign in May and June. Charles, the youngest, after serving as a private in the New York 7th Regiment, was commissioned a lieutenant in a New York regiment in 1862, and later served successively on the staffs of General Banks and General Emory in Louisiana and Virginia. End note. It is mortifying that all events must be seen, by wise men even, through the diminishing lens of a petty interest. Could we have believed that England should have disappointed us thus? That no man in all that civil, reading, brave, cosmopolitan country should have looked at our Revolution as a student of history, as philanthropist, eager to see what new possibilities for humanity were to begin, what the inspirations were, what new move on the board the genius of the world was preparing? No, but every one squinted. Lords, ladies, statesmen, scholars, poets, all squinted, like Borrow's gypsies when he read St. John's Gospel. Edinburgh Quarterly Saturday Review. Gladstone, Russell, Palmerston, Brougham, nay, Tennyson, Carlyle, I blush to say it, Arnold. Everyone forgot his history, his poetry, his religion, and looked only at his shop till, whether his salary, whether his small investment in the funds would not be less, whether the stability of English order might not be in some degree endangered. No Milton, no Bacon, no Berkeley, no Montesquieu, no Adam Smith was there to hail a new dawn of hope and culture for men, to see the opportunity for riddance of this filthy pest which dishonored human nature, to cry over to us, "Up, and God with you, and for this slavery, off with its head. We see and applaud, the world is with you. Such occasion does not come twice. Strike for the universe of men." No, but on the other hand, every poet, every scholar, every great man, as well as the rich, thought only of his pocketbook, and to our astonishment cried, "Slavery forever! Down with the North! Why does not England join with France to protect the slaveholder?" I thought they would have seized the occasion to forgive the Northerner every old grudge, to forget their dislike of his rivalry, of his social shortcomings, forget in a moment all petty disgusts, and would see in him the honored instrument of heaven to destroy this rooted poison tree of 5,000 years. We shall prosper, we shall destroy slavery, but by no help of theirs. They assailed us with mean cavils. They sneered at our manners, at our failures, at our shifts, at our poverty of our treasury, at our struggles, legal and municipal, and irregularities in the presence of mortal dangers. They cherished our enemies, they exulted at the factions which crippled us at home. Whenever the allies of the rebels obstructed the great will and action of the government, they danced for joy. They ought to have remembered that great actions have mean beginnings, poor matters point to rich ends. Alas for England, she did not know her friends. 'Tis a bad omen for England that in these years her foreign policy is ignominious, that she plays a sneaking part with Denmark, with France, with Russia, with China, with America. August 31st. High School. Beginning of term. Whole number 32. Present today 22. Class in arithmetic begin allegation. First Latin begin Cicero, second begin Caesar, third begin Very Rome, 12 in class. Greek, Xenophon, French, 2 in class, geometry, 1 scholar, natural philosophy, 10 scholars, bookkeeping, 6 scholars. Remember Madden's rule to Dr. Johnson about having fruit enough in an orchard. Enough to eat, enough to lay up, enough to be stolen, and enough to rot on the ground. Among resources, too, might be set down that rule of my traveling friend. When I estimated the cost of my tour in Europe, I added a couple of hundreds to the amount to be cheated of, and gave myself no more uneasiness when I was overcharged here or there. So Thoreau's practice to put 100 seeds into every melon hill instead of 8 or 10. Affirmative. John Newton said, "The best way to prevent a bushel being filled with chaff is to fill it with wheat." Trench, on the study of words, past and present of the English language. When a man writes descriptions of the sun as seen through telescope, he is only writing autobiography, or an account of the habit and defects of his own eye. Henry Thoreau found the height of the cliff over the river to be 231.9 feet. This is the end of Part 2 of Emerson's journal collection number 55, dating from the year 1864, when the author was 61 years old. Thank you for listening.